Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking about the Denver Nuggets and previewing their offseason after they lost to the Lakers in 5 games in the Western Conference Finals. I was actually, yesterday morning, I planned out a video that was going to be called What Do the Nuggets Need to Do to Come Back from Being Down 3-1. And then I decided, well, I don't think I'll put this out because it might be rendered completely useless in 5 hours if they lose to the Lakers tonight. And they lost, so I'm kind of happy I did not make that video because it would have been kind of pointless to make a video about how a team can come back if they would have been eliminated already 5 hours after the video was uploaded. So I am instead previewing their offseason today, and I really thought that this team had a good chance at winning the championship. I mean, I have had some really, really bad picks this postseason. I got 3 out of the 4 conference finalists wrong. I predicted Toronto to beat Boston, Milwaukee to beat Miami. I got the LA over Houston correct, but I predicted the Clippers to beat the Nuggets. And then I predicted the Celtics to beat the Heat. We will know as soon as tonight if that prediction was completely wrong. And I predicted the Nuggets to beat the Lakers, which was really just a crazy pick. I don't really know what I was thinking going against LeBron like that, but yeah, we are not doing so hot. So hopefully I get the finals right because the rest of my picks this postseason have been pretty poor. But I really did think that this team had a chance to win a championship, and I think that depending on what they do this offseason, next year they're going to have a really, really good chance to win the championship again. So let's get into what some things they can do this offseason are. Their coach is Michael Malone. I always start by talking about the coach in these videos, and I'm not going to change it up today. Michael proved himself to me as one of the best coaches in the entire NBA during this postseason. He outcoached Doc Rivers, outcoached Quinn Snyder, and hung in there with Frank Vogel for a good portion of this series. Honestly, you could even claim that he outcoached Frank Vogel. The Lakers just had more talent, so they ended up winning the series. But I was very, very impressed with what I saw from him. He was not afraid to insert guys that hadn't played much into the rotation, guys like PJ Dozier, and he wasn't afraid to make changes to his starting lineup. Inserting Jeremy Grant into that starting lineup ended up being one of the bigger decisions that he made this entire playoff run. So, big kudos to him. We just saw a great coaching performance out of Michael Malone, and the Nuggets have to be happy with him going forward. In terms of the draft, they only have the 22nd pick, which came from Houston. They don't have their second-round pick this year. And there are a few different options I think they could go with this pick. They could draft a big, they could draft a wing, or they could draft a guard. So I think they'll probably end up taking who's the best available, but Mason Plumlee is a free agent this offseason, and I'm not real sure that they'll want to bring him back because they've got a lot of other free agents that they're going to be paying. So this could be a cheap option to bring in a backup center. They also have Bol in-house, but they showed a hesitancy to play him this season, so I'm not sure whether or not that'll change next year, but there are some interesting guys that could fall in this part of the draft, guys like Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Smith. Either one of those two, even Precious Achiuwa, if he were to fall to here, any one of those 3 guys could be a really nice option as a backup center. Smith is probably my favorite due to his modern NBA skill set as a shot blocker and shooter, but Achiuwa is a really, really good defender, and Stewart has potential to be a really, really good defender as well. These guys are all just going to be backups for this year at least. Well, and for the foreseeable future, considering they'd be playing behind Nikola Jokic. But all good options there if they are interested in drafting a big guy. Otherwise, if they want to go with a wing, which is possible, they have a good amount of wings in Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr., Jeremy Grant, Will Barton, PJ Dozier, Torrey Craig. But if they feel the need to bring in another one, guys like Elijah Hughes, Robert Woodard, and Desmond Bane are all good options. Once again, my favorite is the best shooter of the bunch, and that would be Desmond Bane. It seems like he's been flying up draft boards, and I heard an interview with him, and he seems like a really well-spoken guy who had a bit of a different upbringing, being raised by his grandparents, and I really liked that interview with him. It was on the Game Theory podcast by Sam Vecini, so go check that out if you're interested. But I like him in this part of the draft as a 3-and-D guy whose defense can get better, but he's one of the best shooters in the draft, and that's always a very valuable skill. Otherwise, they could go with the guard. Guys like Cole Anthony, Malachi Flynn, Grant Riller could all go in this area, although Anthony might be a bit of a reach, or a bit of a drop if he were to fall to 22, but I think it's possible because I'm just not very high on Cole Anthony at all. My favorite of that group would be Malachi Flynn because I think that there's big-time potential that he's going to be a really, really good point guard in the NBA. Someone like Ricky Rubio who can just, I mean, obviously that's not a perfect comparison, but he's a dog on defense. He plays hard. He's a good passer, and he can shoot the ball. So I can really see him end up being a quality starting point guard in the NBA somewhere down the line. And they might want to draft a backup point guard because Monte Morris is a free agent. Restricted, I believe, but a free agent nonetheless after this season. And if he gets paid to go elsewhere, they're going to want to have a nice replacement. And someone like Malachi Flynn or Grant Riller could be a really nice option to be that backup point guard of the future for this team. Otherwise, Cassius Winston and Devon Dotson are other options, but I think taking them at 22nd would be a bit of a reach if they want one of those guys they could trade down into the late first round. Free agency is where it gets big for this team. Outgoing, they have Paul Millsap, Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, who has a player Jeremy Grant has a player option. Torrey Craig is restricted, and PJ Dozier is also a free agent, but I'm not real sure about. I think he's restricted as well. Priority number one for this team after we saw him play super well against the Lakers in the playoffs has to be Jeremy Grant. He played great defense on LeBron and Anthony Davis in that series, and I was super impressed with his offense as well as he was able to attack some isolations against smaller defenders that couldn't quite handle him facing up in the post. So I think he needs to be priority number one. I think that there's potential that he could get a really, really decent payday here. Something like 4 years, $60 million would not be out of the question for me due to his ability as a defender and also an improving ability as an offensive player. His shooting needs to get better, but we saw him have 26 in that game 2. I think it was game 3 actually, the game they won. So he's the third best player on this team as of right now. That might change in the future as Michael Porter Jr. grows, but he's a guy that they simply must bring back. I think their second most important would be Paul Millsap, just due to the winning attitude he has and the veteran presence that he's brought to the team the past few years. I don't think that they'll have to pay him anywhere near the $30 million that he got when he signed his last contract, but something like a 3-year, $27 million deal. If he would take that offer, that'd be perfect for them. Maybe a team option on there because he's getting old. And who knows what kind of production he'll have in his age 38 season. After that, I don't think Mason Plumlee should be a priority for them to bring back. Backup centers are at a premium, and it's not too hard to find one. So if he walks, no biggie. But if you could bring him back on something close to the minimum, that'd be fine as well. Finally, PJ Dozier and Torrey Craig are two other guys that are restricted and are good defensive playing guard/wings. I think that they should probably prioritize bringing back Dozier because he's younger. They seem to like him quite a bit, and he's probably not going to get paid as much as Torrey Craig. So PJ Dozier looks like a really nice player for them. He played pretty well in short stints against the Lakers, and he could be a rotation piece for this team moving forward as a guy that they seem to really, really like. Like I said, their targets need to be to retain those outgoing players. Like I said, the order of importance would be Jeremy Grant, Paul Millsap, PJ Dozier / Torrey Craig, and then Mason Plumlee as the least important free agent. But in terms of targets, outside of those guys, if they have any cap space left, they could bring in a good defensive wing like Kent Bazemore or Glenn Robinson. I don't think that... Obviously, it doesn't hurt to have too many of those guys on your roster, and if Torrey Craig and PJ Dozier aren't on this team next year, they'll have a bit of a hole at the wing position, although they'll still have some really good players in Gary Harris, Michael Porter, Jeremy Grant, Will Barton, so they shouldn't be particularly worried about that, but having too many big wings is never a problem. Trades. The one trade that I could see this team making would be the star trade, and that is Michael Porter, Gary Harris, first round pick or two, Monte Morris for insert star's name here. Maybe you have to throw in Bol as well. But the first name that comes to mind is Bradley Beal. Would I do this trade for Brad? Probably, because Michael Porter has those injury concerns. So it would probably be something like Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr., and Monte Morris, and the 22nd pick, and maybe Bol as well for Bradley Beal. And that's an interesting trade because the Nuggets are getting some good young players in Harris and Porter Jr., and they're also getting a pick, and the Nuggets get their third star. I don't think I would do that if I were the Wizards, because as good of a player as Michael Porter appears to be, he just seems to be injury prone, and that would make me nervous as the number one asset you're bringing in when trading one of the best players your franchise has had in recent years. So maybe they offer that same package for Drew Holiday, and I think that the Pelicans would likely accept that. But would I do that if I were the Nuggets? I would say no, because Holiday is quite a few years older than Beal and not as big of a threat on the offensive end of the floor. And Porter Jr. has flash star potential. Gary Harris seems to be a really good surrounding player around Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic as a guy that can, well, used to be able to shoot the three. This season he struggled, only shot about 33%, but if he can get up around 40%, that's huge for this team, and he's a perfect core piece to add on alongside those two stars. And it would also hurt their depth if they were to have to give up someone like Monte Morris and the first round pick. That guy could be a rotation player for this team next year. So I don't think that the star trade happens. I think that this team comes pretty close to running it back with maybe a subtraction of Mason Plumlee. And really, they don't need a backup center the most if they bring back Grant and Millsap, because both of those guys can play a little bit of the five in a bit of a small ball lineup. So Bol could also become a backup center, and they could also draft a backup center. So Plumlee's the odd man out, in my opinion. Bring back everyone else, and you've got a championship core. I think that this is definitely one of the best three teams in the Western Conference next season if they bring everybody back. And I would definitely be thinking about making them my championship pick before the season if they bring back this core, because I really like this team. And Jamal Murray is going to be a most improved player candidate next year for sure if he can make that jump to stardom. So very high on this team's future. I didn't even talk about him that much, but Jokic obviously is a top 8 player at least. Maybe is anywhere up to top 5. He's very, very good. Yeah, this roster is incredible, and I'm excited to see what this team does in the future. Definitely a team that I'm going to be rooting for to have success, because they're very fun to watch. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you think the Nuggets should do this offseason, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed. That's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you all again very soon.